If you've never seen a grown man argue with a police officer while bathed in the rhythmic, epileptic pulse of a 5,000 lumen industrial strobe light at 2 in the morning, you haven't lived. Or maybe you have lived, but you've lived a life full of good choices and conflict resolution skills, which I clearly do not possess. I stood on my porch, a lukewarm lager in my hand, squinting against the violent flashing of my own creation. The police cruiser sat at the curb, its red and blue lights looking pathetic and washed out compared to the supernova I had mounted to the side of my garage. Officer Miller looked tired. Not just end of shift tired. He looked, I question the choices that led me to this career, tired. He shielded his eyes with one hand, his other hand resting on his belt, not near his gun, but near his taser. I felt like that was a distinct possibility tonight. "Miles!" he shouted over the hum of the transformer and the distant barking of every dog within a 3-mile radius. "Turn it off." "I can't!" I shouted back, taking a sip of the beer. "It's on a timer. It's for awareness." "Awareness of what?" he yelled, the strobe catching him in a freeze-frame grimace. "Blindness?" "Seizures!" I pointed to the banner fluttering in the night breeze. "It's the Luminathon! We're raising awareness!" He stared at me. I stared at him. "Flash, flash, flash. Miles," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous calm tone parents use right before they cancel Christmas. "Mrs. Gable called 911. She said aliens were landing." I snorted. "She wishes. Aliens would probably have better landscaping tips. To understand how I ended up being the neighborhood villain or hero, depending on who you ask, mostly the teenagers think I'm a god. The HOA thinks I'm a domestic terrorist. We have to rewind. We have to go back 2 weeks. Back to a simpler time. Back to the night I nearly shattered my shin bone on a recycling bin. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are inherently garbage days, literally and metaphorically. I had just dragged myself home from a client meeting that could have been an email, and that email could have been a sentence, and that sentence could have been, "I'm an idiot." I work in freelance graphic design, which means I spend half my life explaining to people why they can't pay me in exposure, and the other half trying to figure out if my posture is permanently ruining my spine. I parked my car in the driveway because my garage is currently a graveyard for hobbies I started and abandoned during the lockdown. Sourdough starters that have gained sentience, a kayak I've used once, and enough woodworking tools to build a cabinet I will never build. It was pitch black. Oak Creek, the suburb I call home, prides itself on dark sky compliance, which is a fancy way of saying they are too cheap to install streetlights. I got out of the car, grabbing a bag of groceries that contained the bachelor's holy trinity: frozen pizza, coffee beans, and hot sauce. I rounded the corner of the garage, heading for the side door, and that's when it happened. Crunch. My shin connected with the heavy plastic rim of the recycling bin with the force of a sledgehammer. The sound was sickening. It wasn't a thud. It was a bone-on-plastic crack that vibrated all the way up to my teeth. I didn't scream immediately. There was that 3-second delay where your brain processes the signal, files the paperwork, and then sends the memorandum of agony to your vocal cords. When it hit, I dropped the groceries. The pizza box skidded across the pavement. The hot sauce bottle shattered, instantly scenting the air with vinegar and chili peppers. And I let out a sound that I am not proud of. It wasn't a manly roar. It was the high-pitched shriek of a Victorian ghost. I rolled around on the asphalt for a solid minute, clutching my leg, cursing the darkness, cursing the recycling bin, and cursing the entire concept of waste management. When the nausea subsided, I limped inside, throbbing and angry. "That's it," I muttered to my cat, Barnaby, who was judging me from the top of the refrigerator. "I'm getting a light, a big one." The next day I went to the hardware store. Now I'm a simple man. I didn't want to turn night into day. I just wanted to see where I was walking so I didn't end up in a cast. I bought a standard motion-activated LED security light. It was on sale. It was white. It looked like a small robot face. Innocuous. Reasonable. I spent Saturday afternoon installing it. I'm not exactly a contractor. My skill set is more Photoshop than power drills. But I managed to mount it about 8 feet up on the side of the garage. I wired it in, felt a surge of masculine pride when I didn't electrocute myself, and waited for nightfall. That evening, I tested it. I walked around the corner. Click. The light washed over the driveway. It was bright, sure, but it was a security light. It did its job. I could see the bin. I could see the oil stain on the concrete. I felt safe. I felt secure. I went inside, opened a beer, and sat down to watch a documentary about fungal networks. Life was good. At 7:15 p.m., the knocking started. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't the ding-dong Girl Scouts here with cookies knock. It was the frantic, rhythmic pounding of someone who believes they are fleeing a zombie horde. I paused the TV. Barnaby hissed and ran under the sofa. I walked to the door, assuming there was a fire. I opened it to reveal Mrs. Gable. Now, let me paint a picture of Mrs. Gable for you. She is a woman who treats the Homeowners Association bylaws like the Geneva Convention. She is in her late 50s, wears floral print blouses that are aggressively cheerful, and has a haircut that defies physics. Short, spiky, and seemingly hardened with industrial-grade lacquer. She has lived next to me for 3 years, and in that time our interactions have been limited to her staring at my lawn with disdain and me waving awkwardly while checking the mail. "Can I help you, Mrs. Gable?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, trying to look casual, despite the fact that she looked ready to bite me. "That thing," she spat, pointing a manicured finger towards the side of my house. "It is assaulting my home." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what thing?" "The light!" she shrieked. "The searchlight! The lighthouse beam you have directed straight into my sanctuary!" I stepped out onto the porch and looked. The motion sensor had timed out, so it was dark. "It's off right now, Mrs. Gable." "It was on!" she insisted, her face turning a shade of red that clashed with her blouse. "It triggered when a moth flew by. It blasted through my living room window like a laser." I was trying to read Eat, Pray, Love for the 4th time, and suddenly I was being interrogated by the KGB. "Mrs. Gable," I said, keeping my voice low and reasonable, the tone you use when talking to a drunk person or a toddler holding a knife. "It's a standard LED security light. I almost broke my leg in the driveway last night. I need it for safety." "Safety?" she scoffed. "You live in Oak Creek, Miles. The last crime reported here was a teenager stealing a gnome in 2014. You don't need a prison yard spotlight." "It's not a prison yard spotlight. It's a $20 fixture from Home Depot." "It's light pollution," she crossed her arms, "and it's lowering my property value. Who wants to buy a house next to a landing strip? You need to take it down, immediately." I took a deep breath. This was the moment, the crossroads. I could have said, "Sure, Mrs. Gable, let me adjust the angle for you." I could have been the better man. But I looked at her face, that smug, self-satisfied look of someone who has never been told no by a manager, and something in me snapped. Maybe it was the lingering pain in my shin. Maybe it was the freelance stress. "No," I said. Her eyes went wide. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, it's on my property. It faces my driveway. It's code compliant. I'm keeping the light." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish dropped on a carpet. You can't say no to me. I'm the vice treasurer of the HOA." "And I'm the president of my own driveway," I countered, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Good night, Mrs. Gable." I closed the door. I didn't slam it, but I closed it with authority. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and exhaled. "War," I whispered to the empty hallway. The next 2 days were a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. On Sunday morning, I went out to get the paper and noticed something odd about my light. It was covered in duct tape, thick, silver, heavy-duty duct tape wrapped around the sensor and the bulb. I didn't see her do it. I had no video evidence, but I knew. I looked over at her house. Her curtains twitched. I got the ladder. I climbed up. I peeled the tape off, which took 20 minutes and left a sticky residue. I cleaned it with Goo Gone, glaring at her window the entire time. On Monday, I came home to find a note taped to my windshield. It was written in Sharpie, in all caps, on yellow legal pad paper. Dear neighbor, your refusal to adhere to community standards of decency has been noted. The light is a violation of the quiet enjoyment clause of our neighborhood covenant. Remove it or face consequences. This is your final warning. A concerned citizen. Concerned citizen? I chuckled, crumpling the note. Subtle, Gable. Real subtle. That night the police came for the first time. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when the doorbell rang. It was Officer Miller. This was before the strobe light, before the madness, so he was still relatively fresh-faced, though the cynicism was starting to creep in around the eyes. Evening, he said, touching the brim of his hat. We got a noise complaint. Noise? I frowned. So, I'm making a ham sandwich. Unless the mustard is too loud, I don't know what you mean. Not noise, sorry. Disturbance. A missus. He checked his notepad. Gable? She claims you're shining a laser pointer into her bedroom to harass her? I laughed. I couldn't help it. Officer, come with me. I led him to the driveway. I waved my arms. The light clicked on. It illuminated the driveway. A little bit of light spilled onto Mrs. Gable's side yard. And yes, if you stood at a specific angle and squinted, maybe a photon or two hit her siding. But a laser pointer? No. Miller looked at the light. He looked at Mrs. Gable's house, which was dark and silent, though I could feel the malevolence radiating from the brickwork. That's it? Miller asked. That's it, he sighed. Look, buddy, is it legal? Yes. Is it annoying? Maybe. Can you just aim it down? Like an inch? Just so I don't have to come back here? She's called the station 3 times in an hour. I looked at Miller. He was a guy just doing a job. He didn't want to be here. I nodded. Sure, for you, officer. Not for her. I got the ladder. I tilted the light down so it was pointing almost directly at the asphalt. It was basically a spotlight for ants now. Thanks, Miller said, and left. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. I thought, okay, compromise. That's how civilization works. But Karen Gable did not want compromise. She wanted total, unconditional surrender. 2 days later, the letter came. It wasn't a handwritten note this time. It was official stationery from the City Code Enforcement Department. Violation notice, 10444 Maple Drive. Violation, excessive lumen output, light trespass, fine, $250. She had called the city inspector. She must have known someone, or badgered them, until they just wrote the ticket to shut her up. I stared at the paper. $250 for a light bulb. Something broke inside me then. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and fast. This was something cold. This was a glacier of spite shifting in my soul. This was the realization that I had tried to be nice. I had tried to be reasonable. I had aimed the light at the ground, and she had escalated it to a federal offense. If she wanted a war about lumens, I would give her a war about lumens. I sat down at my computer. I didn't go to Home Depot's website. I went to the website of a theatrical supply company that specializes in outdoor concerts and airport runways. I started reading the municipal code. I read it for 4 hours. I learned things about light ordinances that no human should know. And then I found it. The loophole. Section 402. B. Residential lighting limitations. Exceptions. Holiday lighting, seasonal. Emergency lighting, and temporary lighting for health and safety awareness events. Health and safety awareness events, I whispered, the words tasting like sweet ambrosia. The code stated that for a registered charitable or awareness event, temporary lighting fixtures were exempt from the standard lumen cap and directional shielding requirements, provided the event did not exceed 48 hours and was registered with the county clerk. I leaned back in my chair, a wicked smile spreading across my face. Barnaby, I said to the cat, who was licking his paw, how do you feel about seizures? Barnaby meowed. Exactly, I said. We need to raise awareness. But I couldn't do this alone. I needed firepower. I needed hardware that wasn't available on Amazon Prime. I needed a professional. I picked up my phone and searched for local electricians. I skipped the big companies with the polished websites and the photos of smiling guys in clean uniforms. I looked for the guys with 1-star reviews for being rude, but 5-star reviews for getting the job done. I found a listing for Big Tony's Electric and Rigging. The website was just a Facebook page with a picture of a guy holding a coil of wire like a python. I dialed the number. "Yeah, this is Tony," a voice answered. It sounded like he had been gargling gravel. "Tony," I said, "I have a job. It's unconventional." "I don't do grow houses, kid. Don't ask." No grow house. It's a spite job. I need to install a strobe light, an industrial one, and I need it to be fully code compliant for a safety event." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a low chuckle that built into a wheezing laugh. "A spite job," Tony said. "I'm listening. Tell me about the neighbor." "She measured the lumens," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Tony said. "I'm bringing the heavy gauge wire." I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at Mrs. Gable's house. She was out in her garden, deadheading petunias with aggressive snips of her shears. She looked happy. She thought she had won. She thought the $250 fine was the nail in the coffin. She had no idea. She had just poked the bear, and the bear was about to install a xenon flash tube capable of signaling the International Space Station. The preamble was over. Operation Strobe Light had begun. Big Tony arrived exactly 20 minutes later in a Ford Econoline van that looked like it had been used to smuggle plutonium through a war zone. It was white, technically, but mostly it was the color of rust and bad decisions. There was no logo on the side, just a stencil that said electrical in fading black spray paint, which I found delightfully ominous. I was waiting in the driveway. The van pulled up to the curb with a screech of brake pads that were down to the metal rivets. The engine shuddered and died with a sound like a wet cough. The door opened, and Big Tony stepped out. The name was not ironic. Tony was a geometric impossibility, a sphere of a man who somehow moved with the grace of a jungle cat. He was wearing Carhartt overalls that were stained with grease, wire insulation, and what I hoped was tomato sauce. He had a beard that obscured his neck and a pair of wraparound safety sunglasses resting on a forehead that glistened with sweat, even though it was 60 degrees out. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked at me, then looked at Mrs. Gable's house, then looked at the pathetic little LED light I had mounted on the garage. "That the offender?" he asked. His voice sounded like a cement mixer full of gravel. "That's the one," I said. "She called the city. Got me a $250 fine." Tony let out a low whistle. He walked up the driveway, his boots crunching on the asphalt. He stood under the light, hands on his hips. "Standard motion sensor. Maybe 800 lumens. Weak. My grandmother has brighter ideas than this." "She said it was a laser beam," I added. Tony turned to me, a slow grin spreading through the beard. "So, you want to show her what a laser beam looks like?" "I want to show her the face of God," I corrected. "Legally. I found a loophole." I explained the plan. I told him about Section 402(b). I told him about the exemptions for temporary health and safety awareness events. I told him about the Tri-County Epilepsy and Seizure Awareness Luminathon. Tony listened, chewing on a toothpick. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He just nodded solemnly, like a general accepting a mission to invade a small country. "I like it," he said. "It's petty, it's bureaucratic, it's expensive. You got a budget?" "I have a credit card with a limit I haven't hit yet," I said, "and a burning desire for vengeance." "Right," Tony said. He walked back to the van and threw the back doors open. It was a cavern of chaos inside. Spools of wire, conduit pipes, boxes of breakers, and tools that looked illegal in 3 states. He rummaged around and pulled out a catalog that was thicker than a Bible. "If we're gonna do this," Tony said, slamming the catalog onto the hood of his van, "we gotta talk about the rig. You don't want Home Depot, you want industrial, you want aviation grade." He flipped the pages with a thumb the size of a bratwurst. "Here, the Sky Splitter 3000, xenon flash tube, variable strobe frequency. It's usually used for warning ships away from rocky cliffs or for raves in abandoned warehouses in Prague. 5,000 lumens per burst, but the strobe effect makes it feel like 10,000. Is it Safe? I asked, looking at the picture. It looked like a weapon from Star Wars. Safe, Tony laughed. It won't burn the house down, if that's what you mean. We'll need to run a dedicated 20-amp circuit. If you plug this into your kitchen outlet, you'll blow the microwave every time it flashes. We gotta go direct to the panel. Do it, I said. And the mount, Tony continued, getting into the rhythm of it now. We can't just screw it into the siding. We need a bracket, a swivel arm. You want to be able to aim this thing, right? Precision targeting. I want to be able to aim it at specific windows, I confirmed. Swivel arm it is. I got a buddy in theatrical rigging who owes me money. I can get the bracket today. He looked at Mrs. Gable's house again. She was watching us through the blinds. I could see the slats separating. She's watching, Tony noted without looking directly at her. She always watches. Tony spat the toothpick onto the ground. Let's give her a show. Grab the ladder. The next 6 hours were a symphony of construction noise. If Mrs. Gable thought the light was annoying, the installation process was her personal hell. Tony didn't believe in silence. He worked with a portable radio blasting classic rock at a volume that made my teeth vibrate. We ran conduit along the exterior of the garage. We drilled holes through the brickwork that sounded like machine gun fire. Tony shouted instructions at me that I barely understood. Hand me the wire strippers. No, the good ones, the red handles. Hold this conduit level. Level, Miles. You call that level? You're listing to port. We need more slack on the neutral. Feed it! Feed it! At one point, Mrs. Gable actually came out. She marched up to the property line, her face pinched tight. What is going on here? She demanded, shouting over the sound of AC/DC's Thunderstruck. You cannot represent a construction site in a residential zone without a permit. Tony turned off the drill. He didn't turn off the music. He just looked at her from the top of the ladder. He was terrifying from that angle, a looming giant of denim and beard. Maintenance, ma'am, Tony bellowed. Electrical upgrades, critical safety infrastructure. You wouldn't want a fire, would you? Old wiring is a silent killer? It looks like you're building a satellite dish, she accused. State-of-the-art security, I chimed in, handing Tony a wrench. You were so worried about the old light, Mrs. Gable. I'm upgrading it to a safer, more modern system, just for you. I will call the inspector again, she threatened. Go ahead, Tony yelled. I'm a licensed master electrician. My work is cleaner than your conscience, lady. She huffed and retreated. Tony watched her go, then looked down at me. Cleaner than her conscience. That was a good line, right? Gold, Tony, pure gold. By sunset, it was done. The Sky Splitter 3000 was mounted. It was hideous. It was a gray metal box the size of a microwave, with a clear lens that looked like the eye of a giant insect. It sat on a heavy-duty steel arm that swiveled smoothly on ball bearings. We had wired it to a massive industrial switch box I had mounted right inside the garage door. It had a big red button that said test and a dial for frequency. Tony wiped his hands on a rag. All right, moment of truth, but don't turn it on yet. We gotta test the load. He pulled out a multimeter. We went to the breaker panel. Everything read green. You owe me $1,200, Tony said, packing up his tools, materials and labor, and the dealing with the crazy neighbor surcharge. Worth every penny, I said, writing him a check. You realize, Tony said, leaning on the open door of his van, that this is gonna escalate. You turn that thing on, and you're declaring nuclear war. She fined me $250, Tony. She drew first blood. Tony nodded. He respected the code of the street. Just make sure you got your permits for that event of yours. If the cops come, you need paper. Cops love paper. It confuses them long enough for you to get a lawyer. I'm going to the print shop tomorrow, I promised. Good luck, Miles. If you need more amps, call me. I know a guy with a generator truck. With that, Big Tony rumbled away, leaving me alone with my weapon. I looked up at the Sky Splitter. It looked dormant, sleeping, waiting. The next day, Wednesday, was dedicated to bureaucracy. If I was going to use a loophole, I had to be watertight. I couldn't just say it was an event. It had to look like an event. I went to the county clerk's office first. I filled out Form 11B, application for temporary gathering, charitable event on private property. Name of event? The clerk asked, typing slowly. She was a woman named Doris, who looked like she had been working at that desk since the invention of paper. The Tri-County Epilepsy and Seizure Awareness Luminathon, I said. Doris stopped typing. She looked at me over her glasses. Luminathon? It's about light sensitivity, I lied smoothly. We shine lights to raise awareness of how dangerous flashing lights are. It's ironic. Postmodern activism. Uh-huh, Doris said. She didn't care. Duration? 48 hours, starting Friday night at sundown. Anticipated attendance? Under 50, mostly local, very intimate. She stamped the form. Approved. I paid the $25 filing fee. I held that stamped paper like it was the Magna Carta. Next stop, Kinko's. I needed a banner, a big one. I designed it on my laptop in the parking lot. I used a somber font. Support the cause, it said in bold purple letters. Seizure awareness. And underneath, in smaller text. Warning. Flashing lights in use for educational purposes. I also printed out 50 pamphlets. I just copied and pasted some Wikipedia articles about epilepsy and the neurological effects of stroboscopic lights. I didn't read them, I just formatted them into a nice tri-fold brochure. I bought a bag of purple ribbons, I bought a folding table, I bought a clipboard for a sign-in sheet. By Thursday afternoon, my garage looked like the headquarters of the world's saddest NGO. I had the permit, I had the hardware, I had the branding. Now, I had to do the hardest part, the part that required nerves of steel. I had to invite the enemy. It was 5 p.m. Mrs. Gable was home. Her car, a pristine beige sedan that she drove exactly 5 miles under the speed limit, was in the driveway. I put on a polo shirt. I pinned a purple ribbon to my chest. I grabbed a stack of pamphlets. I walked across the lawn. The walk felt like the final mile to the gallows. My heart was hammering. This had to be a performance worthy of an Oscar. If I cracked, if I smirked, if I showed even an ounce of the hatred I felt, she would know. I rang her doorbell. It took a while. She checked the peephole. I stood back, smiling benevolently, holding the pamphlets visibly. The door opened a crack. The chain was still on. "What do you want?" she snapped. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice dripping with neighborly warmth. "I just wanted to come over and apologize." The door didn't open further, but her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Apologize? For the construction noise?" "For everything," I said. "For the misunderstanding about the light. You were right." She blinked. This was not the script she was used to. I was? Yes. You see, when you complained about the light sensitivity, about how it affected you, it really got me thinking. I did some research. Did you know that thousands of Americans suffer from photosensitive neurological conditions? I suppose? You inspired me, Mrs. Gable. Truly. You made me realize that we need more awareness about this issue, so I've decided to host a fundraiser. I held up the pamphlet. I tried to slide it through the crack in the door. She unhooked the chain and opened the door fully, taking the brochure hesitantly. "A fundraiser?" she asked, looking at the hastily photocopied Wikipedia text. "The Luminathon," I said, gesturing grandly back at my house. "It's this weekend. We're going to have some educational demonstrations. Doctor, we're collecting donations for research. And since you were the catalyst for this whole thing, my muse, really, I wanted to make sure you were personally invited." She looked at the pamphlet. She looked at me. She looked at the giant gray box mounted on my garage. "That machine," she said, pointing. "That is for the fundraiser?" "It's an educational tool," I said. "It demonstrates the, intensity of visual stimuli. But don't worry, we have a permit. It's all sanctioned by the county. For charity." I saw the gears turning in her head. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell me to take my educational tool and shove it. But she couldn't. It was for charity. It was for awareness. If she yelled at me now, she would be the monster who hates sick people. "I see," she said, her lips pursed so tight they were turning white. "Well, that is commendable." "I knew you'd understand," I beamed. You're a pillar of the community, Mrs. Gable. Oh, and here. I held out a purple ribbon. Wear this. It shows you're an ally. She took the ribbon as if it were radioactive waste. I have plans this weekend, she stammered. Inside, with the curtains drawn. A shame, I said. Well, if you change your mind, we'll be out there. Raising money. Fighting the good fight. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I waited until I was inside my own house, with the door closed and locked, before I let out the breath I had been holding. I slumped against the door, laughing silently, the look on her face. The confusion, the trapped rage, it was delicious. It was better than any drug. But the game wasn't won yet. I had set the board. Now I had to play. Friday night. The soft launch. The event wasn't scheduled to start fully until Saturday, but I needed a test run. I needed to calibrate the weapon. The sun went down at 8:15 p.m. The sky turned a bruised purple, fading into black. The streetlights, what few there were, flickered on. The neighborhood was quiet. I went out to the garage. I opened the panel. The Sky Splitter 3000 hummed with potential energy. I had set the frequency to low. One flash every 2 seconds. Blink, 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 just enough to be annoying, not enough to induce madness. Yet. I hit the switch. Wham! The light didn't just turn on, it detonated. Even at the lowest setting, the burst of white light was incredible. It lit up the entire driveway, the street, and the front of Mrs. Gable's house with a clarity that was terrifying. Wham! 2 seconds later. Wham! It was like being inside a camera flash. The shadows jumped. The trees looked like stop-motion animation. I walked out to the lawn to inspect the effect. It was magnificent. The beam was wide, catching the edge of Mrs. Gable's bedroom window perfectly. Every 2 seconds, her house was bathed in a cold, clinical brilliance, then plunged back into darkness. It took exactly 4 minutes. I was checking the angle of the swivel arm when the familiar blue lights swept around the corner. Officer Miller, again. He didn't even turn on his siren. He just pulled up, parked, and sat in his car for a moment. I could see him rubbing his temples. He got out of the car. He walked up the driveway. He looked at the strobe light flashing rhythmically. Wham! Miller flinched. Miles, he said. He sounded so weary. Evening, officer, I shouted cheerfully. Care to make a donation? Turn it off, Miles. I can't. It's the test run for the Luminathon. Miller walked up to me. The what? I handed him the permit. I had it laminated. I was prepared. It's a sanctioned event, I said. County clerk approved, section 402. B, temporary lighting for awareness events. Look, it's right there. Miller took the permit. He took out his flashlight, which was pitiful compared to the Sky Splitter, and read the document. Wham! The strobe flashed, illuminating the paper for him. He read it. He read it again. He looked at the banner I had hung up. Support the cause. He looked at the folding table with the purple ribbons. You registered a charity event, Miller said slowly, just to annoy Mrs. Gable. I registered a charity event to raise awareness, I corrected. If Mrs. Gable is annoyed by awareness, that's between her and her conscience. Miller looked at the house next door. Mrs. Gable was in the window. She was on the phone, presumably with dispatch, screaming that the police officer was conspiring with the domestic terrorist. Miller looked back at me. His lip twitched. He tried to hold it back, but he couldn't. He let out a snort. Then a chuckle. Then he was laughing, a full belly laugh that shook his utility belt. You son of a bitch, he wheezed. This is actually legal. I checked the code, officer. I'm a law-abiding citizen. She's calling the chief, you know, Miller said, wiping a tear from his eye. She's going to call the mayor. She's going to call the governor. Let them come, I said. I have pamphlets. Miller handed the permit back. All right, look. Technically, you're clear, but keep it, I don't know. Keep it reasonable. If you cause a car accident, I have to arrest you. It's aimed away from the road, I assured him. strictly targeting the, awareness zone. The awareness zone, Miller repeated. He shook his head. I hate this job, but I love this neighborhood. Good luck, Miles. Try not to induce any actual seizures. Safety first, officer. He got back in his car. As he drove away, he flashed his cruiser's lights at me once, a salute. I stood alone on the lawn, the strobe pulsing like a heartbeat. Wham, wham, wham. Mrs. Gable's blinds snapped shut. I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. The soft launch was a success. The police were neutralized. The hardware held up. But tomorrow? Tomorrow was the main event. Tomorrow I was going to turn the frequency dial up. Tomorrow I was going to invite people. Tomorrow, we were going to rave. I went inside, grabbed a purple ribbon, and pinned it to Barnaby's collar. We're doing good work, buddy, I told him. Important work. Barnaby just purred. He liked the strobe light. It made the dust motes look like fireflies. The stage was set. The trap was baited. All I needed now was the audience. And, of course, the victim. Saturday morning arrived with the sort of aggressive sunshine that usually makes people want to go hiking or visit farmers markets. I, however, woke up with the grim determination of a general on D-Day, if D-Day involved folding tables and a cooler full of Gatorade. I had slept fitfully, dreaming of lumens and litigation, but as I drank my coffee, staring out at the monstrosity mounted on my garage, a sense of calm washed over me. Today was the day. The Luminathon was going live. I needed a crew. A general cannot fight a war alone. He needs lieutenants. I called Sam. Sam has been my best friend since college. He is a man who thrives on chaos. He's the kind of guy who argues with parking meters and wins. He picked up on the second ring. Talk to me, Sam said. He sounded like he was eating toast. I need you, I said. I'm hosting a charity event. You hate charity, Sam said. And you hate events. Who are you and what have you done with Miles? It's a spite event, Sam. It's for the neighbor, the one with the hair. The Karen? Sam stopped chewing. I'm listening. I installed a strobe light capable of signaling the mothership. I have a permit. I need bodies. I need people to stand on my lawn, drink cheap beer out of red cups, and look concerned about neurological health. I'll be there in an hour, Sam said. I'm bringing chips. By noon, the stage was set. We draped the folding table in a purple tablecloth I had found in the clearance bin at Party City. We set up the pamphlets in neat, fan-like arrangements. I placed a glass jar in the center with a label that read, Donations, suggested. I put $5 of my own money in it to prime the pump. Sam arrived wearing a t-shirt that said FBI, Female Body Inspector, which I made him turn inside out because we were trying to be legitimate. This is diabolical, Sam said, looking up at the Sky Splitter 3000. It looks like a death ray. It's an educational tool, I corrected him, handing him a purple ribbon. Pin this on. You're the VP of Outreach. Right, Outreach, got it. The rest of the afternoon was spent waiting. We sat in lawn chairs in the driveway, watching the slow, creeping shadows lengthen. Mrs. Gable came out once to get her mail. She saw the table. She saw the banner. She saw Sam and me, wearing our ribbons, waving at her. She didn't wave back. She grabbed her mail and scurried back inside like a crab retreating into its shell. She's plotting, Sam noted, cracking open a soda. Let her plot. I have the county on my side. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, the atmosphere changed. The air grew cooler. The birds stopped singing, perhaps sensing the electromagnetic storm that was about to be unleashed. I went into the garage. I stood before the control panel. Okay, I said to Sam, who was standing by the switch. Last night was a test. Tonight is the premiere. Crank the frequency. We want a disorienting pulse. Something that says urgency. Sam turned the dial. 10 hertz? Let's go for 12. We want to be right on the edge of inducing nausea without actually causing vomiting. I hit the switch. Wham, 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 wham. It was instant. It was violent. The light didn't just flash. It hammered the world. At 12 flashes per second, reality ceased to be a continuous stream of time. It became a series of jagged, disconnected photos. Sam looked at me. In the strobe, his movement was jerky, robotic. He gave me a thumbs up, his hand moving in a stuttering arc. "It works!" he yelled over the hum of the transformer. "Music!" I shouted back. I had set up a Bluetooth speaker the size of a suitcase. I hit play on my curated playlist, The Sounds of Science. It was actually just 2 hours of aggressive, dodcore and minimal techno that I had found on a royalty-free music site. It sounded like a robot falling down a metal staircase, on loop. Thump, tisk, thump, tisk, thump, tisk. The bass kicked in, syncing weirdly with the strobe. The effect was hypnotic and deeply unpleasant. "Perfect!" I screamed. The first guest arrived 10 minutes later. It was Mr. Henderson from 3 houses down. He was walking his golden retriever, Buster. Mr. Henderson stopped at the end of the driveway, shielding his eyes. Buster barked at the flashing light. "Miles!" Mr. Henderson shouted. "What in God's name is happening?" I ran down the driveway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Henderson, welcome. It's the Luminathon." "The what?" He was squinting. The strobe made him look like he was vibrating. "Seizure awareness!" I yelled over the techno beat. "We're demonstrating the dangers of photosensitivity. Would you like a pamphlet?" Mr. Henderson looked at the light, then at the banner, then at me. He was a nice old guy, retired accountant. He didn't like conflict. "Is it supposed to be this bright?" he asked. "That's the point," I said enthusiastically. "If we don't see the light, how can we understand the darkness? It's a metaphor. Here, take a ribbon for Buster." I pinned a purple ribbon to the dog's leash. Mr. Henderson looked confused but polite. He took a pamphlet. "Well," he said, "good for you, Miles. Taking an initiative." He walked away quickly. I counted it as a win. By 9 p.m. we had a crowd. Okay, crowd might be generous. We had about 12 people. 4 were friends of mine who had come for the free beer and the spectacle. 3 were teenagers from the neighborhood who thought this was a rave and were disappointed by the lack of drugs but stayed for the chaos. 2 were confused neighbors who had wandered over to complain but were disarmed by the charity angle. And 1 was a guy delivering a pizza to a house down the street who stopped to take a video for TikTok. The atmosphere was electric, literally. The air tasted like ozone. The strobe was relentless. Flash, 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 flash. The world was black and white and purple. We were drinking beer. We were shouting over the music. I was giving a speech to the teenagers about the importance of synaptic firing rates. They were nodding, mostly because the light was making them dizzy. And then, the door opened. Mrs. Gable's front door flew open. She didn't just step out. She erupted. She was wearing a pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers. Her hair was in curlers. She looked like a deranged marshmallows. She stormed across the lawn. In the strobe light, her movement was terrifying. 1 second she was at her door. Flash. Then she was on the grass. Flash. Then she was at the property line. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. Her voice cut through the techno beat like a circular saw. I turned the music down slightly, just enough so everyone could hear her. "Mrs. Gable," I said, opening my arms wide. "You made it. Everyone give a round of applause for our inspiration, Mrs. Gable." The teenagers cheered. They didn't know what was going on, but they loved drama. "Woo, Gable, Gable!" She froze. She looked at the cheering teenagers. She looked at the banner. She looked at me. "You are a lunatic!" she screamed. "Duh," pointing a shaking finger at my face. "This is harassment. I have a migraine. My cat is vomiting. You are assaulting the entire neighborhood." "We're raising awareness," I countered, holding up the donation jar. "Look, we've raised $15. That's $15 for science." "I don't care about your science," she yelled. "I care about my retinas. I'm calling the police. And this time I'm not calling the desk sergeant. I called the superintendent. I know him personally." "Excellent," I said. "Bring him down. He can sign the guest book." She let out a primal scream of frustration, turned on her heel, which looked like a robot pivot in the strobe light, and marched back to her house. "Show's over, folks?" asked one of the teenagers. "No," I said, my eyes fixed on the retreating form of Mrs. Gable. "The opening act is over. The headliner is coming." 20 minutes later, the cavalcade arrived. It wasn't just one car this time. It was 3. 2 standard cruisers and a black SUV. The sirens were off, but the lights were on. The street was now a disco of competing strobes, my white xenon blasts warring with the red and blue LEDs of the law. It was beautiful. It looked like a majestic, seizure-inducing Christmas. Officer Miller was in the first car. He got out, shaking his head. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. But the main event was the man who stepped out of the black SUV. He was tall. He was bald. He was wearing a white shirt with gold bars on the shoulders. This was the superintendent. He looked like he ate gravel for breakfast and washed it down with justice. He walked up the driveway. Miller trailed behind him like a nervous squire. I cut the music. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the chug, chug, chug of the cooling fan on the sky splitter and the relentless flashing. "Who is the homeowner?" the superintendent barked. "I am, sir," I said, stepping forward. I didn't hold a beer. I held my clipboard. "Miles, nice to meet you." "Turn that light off," the superintendent said. He didn't ask. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir," I said. "It's a critical component of the event." "The event," he repeated. He looked at the banner. He looked at the teenagers who were now filming on their phones. "Mrs. Gable says you are running a psychological warfare operation." "Mrs. Gable is prone to hyperbole," I said. "This is the Luminathon. We are fully permitted. Officer Miller has seen the paperwork." The superintendent turned to Miller. Is this true?" Miller cleared his throat. "Technically, sir, yes. He has a permit for a temporary awareness event. Section 402. B. Exemptions for lighting intensity." The superintendent narrowed his eyes. "Let me see it." I handed over the laminated permit. He shone his flashlight on it. Flash, flash, flash. The strobe made reading difficult. He grimaced. "This permit," the superintendent said slowly, "allows for temporary lighting. It does not allow for a public nuisance. This is excessive." "Define excessive," a voice rumbled from the darkness. We all turned. Emerging from the shadows of the side yard was Big Tony. I hadn't called him. I didn't know he was coming. But there he was, like a guardian angel in grease-stained overalls. He was holding a voltage meter and drinking a Red Bull. "Who are you?" the superintendent asked. "Anthony Valenti," Tony said, stepping into the strobe light. "Master electrician, license number 44902. I installed the rig." He walked up to the superintendent, completely unfazed by the gold bars. "I monitored the output," Tony lied. Or maybe he didn't lie. I don't know. "We are operating at 4,800 lumens. The code for temporary events allows up to 5,500. We are under the limit. The frequency is 12 Hz. The limit for non-industrial signaling is 15. We are compliant." The superintendent looked at Tony. He looked at the permit. He looked at the light. "You're telling me," the superintendent said, his voice tight, "that this is legal?" "I'm telling you," Tony said, "that if you shut him down, you're shutting down a registered charity event based on subjective annoyance rather than code violation. And that sounds like a lawsuit. A civil rights lawsuit. Denial of assembly. The ACLU eats that stuff up." Tony took a sip of his Red Bull. "And I'd testify as the expert witness." Silence. The strobe flashed. Flash, flash, flash. The superintendent looked at Mrs. Gable's house. She was in the window again, watching. He looked back at me. "You're doing this to piss her off." "I'm doing this to raise awareness," I said. "But if she's pissed off, that's an unfortunate side effect." The superintendent sighed. It was a deep, soul-crushing sigh. He handed me back the permit. "You have until midnight," he said. "If this light is on at 12:01 a.m., I will cite you for disturbing the peace, permit or no permit. Do you understand?" "Loud and clear, sir," I said. "Midnight. We respect the law here." "And turn the music down," he added. "If I get one more noise complaint, I'm taking the speaker." "Understood." He turned around. "Miller, let's go." "But sir," Miller whispered, "what do I tell Mrs. Gable?" "Tell her," the superintendent said, getting back into his SUV, "to buy some blackout curtains." I watched them drive away. The red and blue lights faded, leaving only my glorious, white, pulsing strobe. The teenagers cheered. Sam high-fived me. Tony crushed his Red Bull can and tossed it into the recycling bin, the very bin that had started this whole war. "You saved my ass, Tony," I said. "I was in the neighborhood," Tony shrugged. "Plus, I hate that lady. She yelled at me about my van yesterday. Nobody yells about the van." "Beer?" I offered. "Nah, gotta go. I got a job at a haunted house in Jersey. They need fog machines." He walked into the darkness, a legend vanishing into the mist. We partied until midnight. At 11:55 p.m., I stood on the lawn for the finale. The crowd had thinned out, but Sam was still there, and a few neighbors who had come out to see what the commotion was, and ended up staying for the sheer absurdity of it. I walked over to the fence, the line of demarcation. Mrs. Gable was not in the window. The lights in her house were off. But I knew she was there. "Mrs. Gable!" I shouted into the night. "Thank you for your support. The Luminathon is a success. Same time next year?" There was no answer, just the silence of a defeated enemy. At 11:59 p.m., I went to the garage. Sam was waiting. "Countdown?" Sam asked. "Countdown," I said. 10, 9, 8. The strobe pulsed. The heart of the beast. 3, 2, 1. I hit the switch. Darkness. Immediate, heavy, crushing darkness. The sudden absence of light was more disorienting than the light itself. My eyes, adjusted to the strobe, saw phantom flashes in the gloom. The silence was absolute. The crickets were too terrified to chirp. "It's over," I whispered. "We did it," Sam said. "We actually did it." The next morning the hangover was real, but the victory was sweeter. I went outside to clean up. The banner was sagging. The purple ribbons were scattered on the lawn like fallen soldiers. I looked over at Mrs. Gable's house. There was a truck in her driveway. A contractor truck. Not an electrician. A window treatment specialist. I watched as a man in a blue polo shirt carried large, thick, black bundles into her house. Blackout curtains. Industrial grade. She wasn't moving. She wasn't fighting. She was fortifying. I walked down to get my mail. As I reached into the box, I heard the front door of her house open. Mrs. Gable stepped out. She looked tired. Her hair was less spiky than usual. She looked like a general who had lost a major campaign but saved the army. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable," I said cheerfully. "Lovely day." She stared at me for a long moment. There was no fire in her eyes, just a cold, hard calculation. "You made your point, Miles," she said. Her voice was flat. "I'm glad we could come to an understanding," I said, "about the importance of lighting." "I am installing shutters," she said. "Rolling metal shutters, like they have in hurricane zones, or riots." "Smart investment," I nodded. "Safety first. If you ever," she pointed a finger, but it lacked the usual venom, "ever do that again, I will buy a drum kit. And I will learn to play it, badly, at 6 a.m. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "That sounds fair, Mrs. Gable, that sounds fair." She turned and went back inside. I walked back up my driveway. I looked at the Sky Splitter 3000. It was cold and gray and ugly. I grabbed the ladder. I took a wrench. I began to unbolt it. The war was over. The treaty had been signed. Mutually assured destruction had been established. She had her shutters. I had my strobe. If she escalated, I would escalate. But for now, we had peace. I took the light down and placed it gently in a box in the garage, right next to the abandoned kayak. "Rest now," I whispered to the machine. "You served well." I went inside. I poured a coffee. I sat down at my computer to catch up on 2 days of missed work. My email inbox was full. One subject line caught my eye. It was from the HOA president. Subject, regarding recent events, nomination. I opened it. "Dear Miles, while the board has received numerous complaints regarding your event, we cannot deny the organizational skills and knowledge of municipal code you displayed. We are looking for a new compliance officer. Mrs. Gable is stepping down from the committee due to stress. Would you be interested?" I leaned back in my chair. "The compliance officer? The person who enforces the rules? The person who wields the power of the fine?" I looked at Barnaby. "You know," I said, "I think I could be good at that. I think I could be very, very good at that." I hit reply. "Dear Board, I would be honored. Because if there's one thing I learned from the Luminathon, it's this. If you can't beat them, join them. And then once you're in charge, it's down. Rewrite the rules so you can install whatever lighting you damn well please." I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like victory.